Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rachel Massey, and I'm the Senior Science and Policy Advisor with CHE, the Collaborative for Health and Environment. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to. We're really looking forward to today's conversation with Dr. Jennifer Orme-Zavaleta. I'm going to just get started with a few housekeeping items, and then I will introduce our speaker. This webinar is hosted by the EDC Strategies Partnership. The partnership members include Healthy Environment and Endocrine Disruptor Strategies, or HEEDS, a program of environmental health sciences, Commonweal's Biomonitoring Resource Center, the Health and Environment Alliance, or HEAL, and CHE. And we'd also like to especially thank the Environmental Protection Network for connecting us with Dr. Orme-Zavaleta. If you'd like to download the slides for today's conversation, please visit the webinar page on our website at healthandenvironment.org, and we'll put that direct link into the chat now. This webinar is being recorded, and it's scheduled to last for 30 minutes, although we might go a little over that time. We will close the chat once we begin the presentation, but we invite you to type your questions in the Q&A box at any point, and we'll get to as many comments and questions as we can. If you'd like to activate closed captions, you can do that by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen. Today's webinar is the second in a series of conversations we're hosting related to ongoing changes at the federal level. These conversations will include a variety of opinions and perspectives. As with all of our webinars, opinions expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the organizations in the EDC Strategies Partnership. Now I get to introduce our speaker. So Dr. Jennifer Orme-Zavaleta served at EPA for 40 years from 1981 to 2021. She began with EPA as a student intern conducting research on the potential health effects of drinking water contaminants. Over the course of her career, she worked in the Office of Toxic Substances and the Office of Water in the areas of human health and ecological research, risk assessment, policy and regulation development, and more. From 2017 to 2021, she served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Office of Research and Development and as EPA's Science Advisor. In 2021, Dr. Orme-Zavaleta received EPA's Distinguished Career Service Award, as well as a Distinguished Executive Presidential Rank Award. We'll share her full bio in the chat, and you can read more about her on the web page. As you can see, she's had a very distinguished career at EPA, and we're really grateful that she's willing to share her insights with us today. So with that, Dr. Orme-Zavaleta, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. And hello, everyone. I'm really happy that you were able to join us today, and I hope everybody's staying cool. I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and it's a bit sticky and warm here today. So we want to talk a little bit about environmental health research, particularly at EPA, and to share a little bit of information about what's happening in EPA's Office of Research and Development. And to do that, I wanted to kind of give us a little bit of a backdrop context. So think back 55 years ago when we had very visible pollution in the United States. We had smog hanging over cities. We had fish floating in water. We had oil slicks in water that for some water bodies caught on fire, some several times. We had open dumping of chemical storage bins or barrels. We had some streetlights coming on in some cities because emissions from the industries, steel mills and others made it so dark that even at noontime, streetlights were coming on. So those were some of the conditions that were happening in the 1970s. And Richard Nixon, who was president at that time, while we might not think of him necessarily as an environmentalist, he was looking for distractions. So he was trying to get a distraction from the protests of the Vietnam War. And he was also trying to get a win with environmentalists who had been aligning themselves more with an opponent of his, Edward Muskie, who had ambitions for the presidency himself. So with that, President Nixon signed a reorganization plan, which was an authority that was given to the president at that time. And he created EPA. He did that by cobbling it together from a variety of other existing departments. And EPA's mission was pretty simple: protect human health and the environment. And that simple mission was really powerfully motivating, not only for current EPA employees, but also for people like me who are now retired. In trying to achieve that mission, there was an environmental system that was created that engaged at the national level, the state and tribal level, and the local level. At the national level, we had program offices like the air office, the water office, the chemicals office, and the what we call now the land office. And they were really charged with trying to set the national policy for environmental protection. Then it was regional offices and state partners and others that had the responsibility for trying to implement that on the ground. The research and development office that was created when EPA was created, they had a responsibility for providing a lot of the science and information that could help inform policies at the national level, but also how to implement those policies at the regional and state level. There was legislation in many of the environmental statutes that emerged during the 1970s. I just list two here. The first one is really out of the what was the Federal Water Pollution Control Act and then evolved into the Clean Water Act, but it identified where laboratories were to be established. They were supposed to be geographically distributed, to be aligned with area universities so that it could help bring up the next generation of scientists. But there was also legislation, such as the second one, the 42 U.S. Code 7403, that applied to air research, and it really prescribed what kind of air research needed to be conducted: epidemiology studies, clinical studies. And this was the research that was really core to the work that was taking place at the Chapel Hill facility, the Human Studies facility here in North Carolina, which, by the way, is now closed. One thing that I thought was apropos to kind of have in your thoughts as we go through this conversation, a recent article that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences highlights that much of what keeps America's air, water, and food safe relies on the research that comes out of ORD and their expertise. ORD was established in a number of locations across the country. A few of those locations have phased out for a variety of reasons over time, but ORD is headquartered in Washington. I think the Vanguard Laboratory facility is here in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, with that satellite office in Chapel Hill. So that's the second largest aggregate of EPA researchers. Then there was Cincinnati, which had a large focus, particularly on the built environment, looking at drinking water and wastewater treatment. Research Triangle Park, by the way, its initial focus was looking at air quality and air research. And then there were facilities in Narragansett, Rhode Island, Edison, New Jersey, Athens, Georgia, Gulf Breeze, Florida, Duluth, Minnesota, Ada, Oklahoma, Corvallis, and Newport, Oregon. Two other facilities that are no longer active were Grosse Ile, Michigan, and Las Vegas, Nevada. The way ORD operated, particularly for the past decade or so, was in a matrix system. And the idea there was to identify national research programs that would work closely with the agency's program offices to ensure there was an understanding of what were the environmental problems, what work needed to be done, and what was the timing, and how was that work going to be used. And so there was a focus around 6 areas: air, climate, and energy, chemical safety, homeland security, human health and environmental risk assessment, water resources, and sustainable and healthy communities. So they helped identify the what of the work that needed to be done. And then in 2018 and implemented in 2020, we reorganized ORD. And this is when I was there at the time as the principal deputy, with the idea that we really wanted to make sure that we reduced our overhead, maximized how we used our employees so that there was less overhead and more. And by overhead, I'm speaking of managers and others, but really more people to do the work to meet the needs to help solve the environmental problems. We wanted to focus it around the kind of science that people did and to ensure that we really could maximize the impact of that work in meeting the agency's needs, but also meeting state needs. Because as I mentioned, they're the ones where the rubber hits the road. They're trying to implement these policies, and they're the ones that really make the difference in communities and trying to address environmental issues. So the way that the reorganization set about was, if you look at the bottom row here, and I'll use the pointer. So we had a center that focused on environmental measurements and modeling. These were a lot of the field people, the laboratory people, the data generators. We had a computational toxicology and exposure center that helped look at how we can make better use of chemical structure and bioactivity and helping to predict toxicity. Because one of our previous administrators, Lisa Jackson, challenged us with, if you keep studying one chemical at a time, we're never gonna be able to really protect public health, because it's just going to take way too long. So is there a better, faster, more effective way at evaluating toxicity and in trying to really instill environmental protection? There was a group for public health and environmental assessment. These were the people that helped connect the dots and helped really make sense of what it was we were exposed to, why did that matter, what was it that we really know, what is it that we need to know, so they could also help inform research as well as make use of the research that was being generated. And then there was a center here for environmental solutions and emergency response. And these were the folks that really tried to get at the so what, and try to clean up what was happening in our environment. If there was an emergency, if there was a Flint, Michigan, if there was a Deepwater Horizon, a Gold King mine accident, they were the ones that really helped mobilize the expertise within ORD to go and fix the issues, clean up the environment, solve the problem. ORD had three primary responsibilities. One was to address statutory requirements as well as administration priorities. So if the Clean Air Act said that we needed to develop federal reference methods, it was this kind of guidance that came in that helped drive the research that we would do. But we also had a responsibility for looking down the road and trying to anticipate what were the future problems coming that the agency might need to address, and to take advantage of time to be able to conduct that research in order to address those problems. And it was this kind of foresight responsibility that allowed us to get a better understanding of the perfluorinated chemicals, PFAS, and help to develop a body of information so that it could help the agency tackling those kinds of emerging contaminants. And then, because of all the expertise that is part of the way ORD develops its research and is looking down the road, we had a huge responsibility for providing technical assistance. And this is probably one of the things that I think has the greatest value, especially in considering states and local communities. Often that they would reach out to ORD to help them with their particular issues and challenges. So this is what was. And with this new administration, we're learning what they would like it to be. Now, mind you, the reorganization that we did was during the first Trump administration, and they were actively engaged in giving us feedback with the structure that we developed and the way that we would do our work and making sure it would fit those needs. Now with Trump 2, their mindset has changed. And the proposal is to no longer have an Office of Research and Development that would be at what we call a national program level. And by that, there would be a Senate-confirmed assistant administrator leading the organization. Rather, the proposal is to remove it as a national program, create a new office that would be under the Office of the Administrator, called the Office of Applied Science and Environmental Solutions. And then some staff from ORD would be reassigned through an application process, a competition process, into 4 program offices: the chemical office, the air office, the water office, and the land office. Last week, there was a little bit more information that was shared with ORD that made its way to us that are outside of the agency, to help us get some further thinking of what the administration has. And it would seem that the majority of researchers that would be in the measurement and modeling group would be part of one of the new divisions in what they call OASIS. Um, they're a large part of the computational toxicology group would go to the chemical office. And they were actually a major partner for the CompTox group, because part of what CompTox did was to help develop the science and methodologies to better evaluate screening and prioritizing contaminants that might be considered for further regulation in the chemical office. It seems that some of the risk assessors that are currently part of the Public Health and Environmental Assessment Center would move to the air office, and then other staff would also be invited to apply for positions in the water office and the land and emergency management office. For OASIS, what seems to be the thinking now is establishing one group that would be doing work similar to what's in the current ORD, that would really focus on engagement, state and tribal interactions, the STAR grants program, and others. But there would be three divisions: the Applied Science and Environmental Methods Division, the Environmental Solutions Division, and the Coastal Science Solutions Division. Their mission would be to develop efficient and effective environmental solutions through data, methods, and tools that would help inform the agency risk assessment and risk management actions. One interesting addition that we didn't know about earlier in this spring, but seemed to be included in what was released last week, is that this office would also incorporate what's currently the Office of Children's Health. And there would, as I mentioned, there would be responsibilities for cross-agency science coordination, managing scientific processes, that regional, state, tribal engagement. And then there would also be other support functions that this organization would play. So we're learning a little bit more. We still have a lot of information that's not clear. And it's not really clear how much of a true research and development kind of function this group might have versus more of receiving direction from a program office saying, we need you to develop method for this to measure these contaminants in this media, or we need you to help us look at nutrient pollution in these water resources. So we don't really have enough information about exactly what this group was doing, but we're learning more. How does this relate to what's on the map? Well, OASIS would still have Washington, D.C., RTP, Cincinnati, and Ada, Oklahoma as part of its organization. Why Ada? Well, Representative Tom Cole from Ada, Oklahoma, is the chair of the House Appropriations Committee. So there's no way he's going to let things happen with Ada. From last week's information, it would seem that Narragansett and Gulf Breeze and Corvallis would be part of OASIS, and possibly Duluth. But we've also been hearing some rumors that the Chemical Safety Office would also like to have Duluth, Minnesota, because the work that they do there, which is freshwater toxicity and ecotoxicity, that aligns closely with the computational toxicology forum. And this would again be helpful, particularly for the Chemical Safety Office. What's not mentioned, and so what we still have questions about, is would there still be a presence, a research presence in Edison, New Jersey? What about Athens, Georgia? And what about Newport, Oregon? And we don't have good information on whether those facilities would continue or if they would be shuttered. The other thing that we aren't really clear about is for those positions that may move to the 4 program offices, would those people be going to conduct research, or would they be there to provide technical expertise and to help those offices with their rulemaking activities? So that's something that still hasn't really been clarified. So in thinking about all this, part of the thought is, well, okay, so is this really, how's this going to impact what EPA does? And is this really as bad as it might sound, or does it sound like it's a pretty good thing? One thing to keep in mind is that the EPA's reorganization plans targets the independence of science and scientists. It jeopardizes the statutory requirements of doing the best available science and the agency using the best available science in its decision making. It impacts scientific integrity, and all of this can further erode public trust, particularly in federal science. So some of the things that have been proposed appears to be really replacing a leading world-class research and development organization to become an in-house sort of contract lab, where they will do the bidding based on the explicit direction of the program offices, rather than having that uh, independent scientific thought and thinking through and talking with people and developing their own uh, ideas of what research needed to be done and keeping that conversation going. So we still have to see kind of how that's going to play out. The other thing that's troubling in looking at the descriptions of what the new divisions would do under the OASIS organization is there's no mention of health and environmental effects research. So this is really getting at the questions of what happens if you're exposed to something. Does it cause a problem? At what dose might that cause a problem? How does that relate to what it is you're exposed to? And how does that inform risk? So that piece would be missing. And that would be a huge piece that I think might meet the interest of chemical industry, but I think it's not going to serve the agency well. It's certainly not going to serve the public well. There's positions within ORD that are called Title 42 and ST positions, or science and technology positions. And these are really senior research positions. Congress appropriated these positions to ORD, but Title 42s can also be found in the Chemical Safety Office. But the ST positions are unique to ORD. If ORD goes away, what happens with these positions? Again, that would be presumably left to Congress to determine if they would change that appropriation and where those positions could be used, but it remains unclear at this point. As I mentioned before, if some staff move from ORD to the programs, it's really unclear what their role is going to be. And we're hearing mixed things from those still within the agency or those who have recently left, whether they get to conduct research, which aligns with how they were hired and why they even chose to go work for EPA, or would they just be technical experts to help inform program office activities. And ORD is not the only place in the agency where it looks to be impacted by this target on science. It looks like several other programs, the Office of Water and the Air Office, offices that focus on science would be, I say eliminated, but they're really being kind of disbanded and regrouped with into a different office with a potentially different function. So we still have to see how science is going to play out for the programs as well as for the research group. And we heard early on when the administration first came in that their plans of disbanding the scientific advisory boards. And this seems to be an unfortunate ping pong match that has evolved over the past several presidential transitions, where the incoming administration would like to have representatives on those scientific advisory boards that they feel reflect a balanced perspective. Maybe it's balanced. It appears it could be biased, but it tends to appear that they want people on these advisory boards that would be friendly to potential policy decisions that that particular administration may want. So it's happened under Republican administrations. It's happened under Democratic administrations. It's happening again. And it's just really an unfortunate turn of events that the incoming groups wants their scientists to be informing them. What's happened already? Well, um, a lot of unfortunate things in particular. There has been a goal to reduce the federal footprint and the number of federal employees. So far there's been 2 rounds of reductions of staff through what we call heard. First off was the Fork in the Road memo, which was a deferred resignation program. We had 1 round of that. Not too many people took it because there was still a lot of uncertainty about what was happening and where Congress was on all this. But now that Congress has passed a budget to fund agencies through the end of the fiscal year, a second round of what's called the DRP, Deferred Resignation Program, was offered, along with a VERA program, a voluntary early retirement program. And many more people have taken this. We've already seen a wave of people leave the agency by the middle of June. And these were people largely that had decided they were going to go, or people who were taking the deferred resignation who were under 40. For those who were over 40, they were given a 45-day window to further think through if they wanted to take this potential out. And so they've got until, I think, the middle of July. And so we've already seen, close to 250, 260 people from ORD leave this round. And there's probably another 100 or so in the wings trying to decide whether they're going to go by the middle of July. And that leaves a huge dent in the organization. And don't forget about those people early on with the transition who were put on probation, or administrative leave. These were probationary employees, those who had less than 1 year of employment experience, those who had in their position descriptions environmental justice responsibilities or diversity, equity, and inclusion responsibilities. They've been on leave and they are subject to RIF, which is a reduction in force, by the end of July. So, and I think there were close to maybe 1,800 people in that category. So we're going to continue to see a pretty significant shrinkage within the agency that is also impacting ORD. While all of that is sort of in the wings, because some of it has been challenged in the courts, the reorganization plans as well as the RIF plans and probationary employees, one thing that has been effective is that the administration has gone ahead and basically cut off the funding. So even though you might have people still employed, they are really hamstrung in their ability to do research. So grants have been canceled, cooperative agreements, other funding mechanisms, contracts. Um, and to complement that, there has been funding from the federal government to academic institutions who often partner with EPA and ORD. Their funding has been reduced. So it has really put a stop to a lot of work. And it's interesting, and again, my personal view on this is you've got a group that's come in touting waste, fraud, and abuse, but as a taxpayer, I see that a lot of work has been underway and is now not going to be completed because the funding agreements have been discontinued. And so that seems like an awful lot of waste. I mentioned earlier about the Chapel Hill Human Studies Facility. This is one of the few facilities that EPA leased, and I believe the only one left in ORD that was leased. So EPA shared or leased a building from the University of North Carolina because the building is on their campus next to their medical school. And we had an agreement not only to conduct research in that building, but we also had an agreement that funded UNC researchers to make use of these highly unique and specialized exposure chambers. And the work that was done in these laboratories were just critical for the air program in developing their NAAQS assessment, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, for ozone, for particulate matter. They were focusing on wildfire smoke and what were the potential impacts of wildfire smoke on lung function. And especially they're looking at commercially available masks to see how effective were they in trying to reduce people's exposure from wildfire smoke. So all of that is gone. And the people who were in those buildings, I think this is their last week to occupy the buildings, and they'll move out, and those facilities will be shuttered until there's a decision at some point of what to do with them next. The other thing that's also happened is the scientific integrity policy. This is something that all federal agencies put in place to help ensure, and again, to help build trust from the public in federal science. So it helped ensure that the authorship, helped ensured how you handled disagreements of scientific opinion. It helped ensure that the science was really being done right, and we're doing it the way that we were supposed to do. It incorporated aspects of quality assurance, and a lot of considerations. It also was there to serve to help protect the independence of science and to protect scientists from being intimidated or interfered with from non-scientists and from political appointees. So again, work would be done, work would be well vetted, it would follow proper procedures, it would go through peer review, independent peer review, and be public and made available to the public. So that now is a bit upended, and we'll have to see, how this is going to play out. There has been a lot of congressional interest. Congressman Tonko from New York, especially, has been trying very hard for years to try to get a bill that would protect scientific integrity. But that rock has fallen back down the hill, and it's going to be another steep climb to push it back up. So all of these changes, what are the potential impacts that we're going to see of this? Well, one of them, as I just mentioned, linking to scientific integrity, is we see a greater potential for oversight of science and its use. So rather than having scientific leaders, scientific managers oversee science and how it's done, we'll now potentially have non-scientists directing that work. Rather than having research that was available to inform multiple programs under the 6 research programs, that work is now potentially going to get re-siloed back into program offices. And by doing that, it's going to undo some of the goals from the 2020 reorganization and potentially lead to duplication of effort, which would increase costs and decrease efficiencies. We're going to lose the independence of risk assessment. By not having an independent group conducting risks that was not influenced by a desired regulatory outcome, there will be a potential and a suspicion of bias in a risk assessment, again, for the purpose of achieving a particular policy outcome. We run the risk of losing transparency and public awareness. There may not be enough information made available to the public about what studies were considered or not considered, what work was factored into a risk assessment or left out, and why. So it kind of puts people in the dark, and and it could ultimately result in underserving protections for human health and the environment. We're not going to have people looking down the road. So we're going to lose that awareness of emerging contaminants, whether it was endocrine disruptors, whether it was PFAS, whether it's microplastics, or whatever else could be coming down the road. On the federal science side, we're going to lose that capability. We're losing a lot of scientific expertise and historical knowledge. One thing that's been achieved is something Russell Vogt, who is the director of OMB, wanted and stated publicly in 2023 before the election. He wanted to demoralize and traumatize the federal workforce, and he called out EPA specifically. The other thing that I find really troubling is we're really going to be hampering that next generation of scientists. We're going to lose training opportunities for people who were working on their doctorate, or new doctorates coming in to get postdoctoral training, to come in to get real world experience at an EPA lab. We're going to lose that opportunity. And to compound that, a lot of those programs are also being threatened in universities. And so it's going to make it harder for people who want to study environmental science or public health to have an opportunity to do that. But then it's also going to be harder for them to get experience in applying that expertise with real world situations. And there can be much more that we haven't thought about today. But I just want to drive home the point. I think the thing that I'm really most concerned with is it's the American people who are going to be finding themselves short, that we run the risk of loss of protection for public health and the environment. And I think that's something that everybody needs to be thinking about. But as one of the sales pitches says, but wait, there's more. So in addition to some of these issues, we have an executive order that came out a few weeks ago about restoring the gold standard of science. And this is something that if you were to read it, you might say, oh, okay, well, this sounds okay. But here is one of those things where you have to look at the words carefully. And it's really not the words so much as it is the actions that might be taken as a result of those words. And what we see here with the executive order is that it reiterates some themes from a failed attempt of a rulemaking from Trump 1 on the transparency of regulatory science. And that whole rulemaking, I think was an opportunity that the administration was trying to take in uh, discounting some studies and putting greater emphasis on other studies to inform risk and to inform policy decisions. So one of the outcomes of this is what I call the cherry picking of studies that could be used in risk assessment. And what's at risk is the consideration of epidemiology or other public health studies, clinical studies that could be considered and were extremely important in informing air policy decisions, water quality decisions. Again, with a potential goal that the administration wants to support a particular risk management agenda and outcome. So if you discount studies that might give you a lower answer than you want, then you have a greater chance of using science to support the decision that you're looking for. It also tends to reopen the door for political interference. And then this would give us them a control over what research is done, how it's done, who reviews it, and how it's going to be reported. So a potential fallout from all of this is that there would be less transparency and less public health protection. So with that, I'm going to leave us with my friend Cindy Sonich-Mullen, Cincinnati, here out on Earth Day, just as some food for thought. And I'll turn it back to Rachel and look forward to answering questions that you all have.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a very informative presentation. And we have a lot of great questions in the Q&A here, so I'll just pick a couple of them. So one question that one person asked is, well, I'll just read this question to you. It says, many international governments extensively use US EPA data, including ORD's data, in their work. There is some concern that future research products produced by the US EPA may be subject to political influence and that the end products may not have the same level of independence as they previously did through no fault of the scientists involved. Do you think this is a possibility, and do you have any tips for evaluating whether political influence was possibly exerted on a research product?
Yeah, so that certainly echoes some of what I was trying to get across, is that if all of this plays out, and that it's still an if, but if this plays out and ORD is eliminated as an organization, and this reorganization plan that the administration puts forward is implemented, that suspicion of bias is there. And where you have opportunities to challenge actions that the agency may take will be through public comment period, provided that there is a public comment period, because we already are seeing evidence of the administration trying to skirt that. Certainly through legal challenge. And for you attorneys out there, you've got job security. I don't think there will be any shortage of work that could come your way. But I would also note that there's other groups out there. So look at REACH. Um, look at ECA from the European side. Look at California. The IRIS program director, Chris Thayer, left the agency in May, and she now heads up the office in the state of California, who conducts risk assessments. And I would look to the kind of assessments that California may be coming out with, or New Jersey, or some of the other states that have been more actively engaged, and be able to look at what information they're considering versus what is it that the agency used. And that should help with being able to provide pushback. The downside of this is, it takes time, it's a hassle, and the American people are still not going to be served well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that good question, and thanks for that really informative answer. Okay, so here's another question. This person is asking about examples. So this person says, can you say more about health and environmental effects research? Can you give a few examples? Can you talk about the impact on public health? Does this include human health risk assessments that examine exposure to environmental contaminants?
So when you think about risk assessment, it's risk assessment is a result of information on hazard and information on exposure. And the hazard information, again, is if you're exposed to something, does it cause a problem? So health effects research helps to understand what happens if you're exposed, what kinds of impacts, how does it affect whoever's exposed, whether it's a human, whether it's wildlife. But it helps us better understand, what happens if you're exposed, at different levels, and is that effect long lasting? Is it short term? Does it go away after a short period of time? But it's that information, that toxicity information, that feeds directly into developing a risk assessment, because we're looking at the wealth of research studies to determine, do we have from our experimental data information about what does not cause an effect, as well as what doses do cause an effect. And then that can feed into our understanding of potential risk. How certain are we about that information, and how does it relate to our environmental exposures, to feed into a risk assessment. And the risk assessment is really foundational for developing regulations, because if you look at our statutes, whether it's the Safe Drinking Water Act, or I think the Clean Air Act, where you have a health goal that's established, and that's informed by risk. And then once you have a health goal, then there's a regulatory decision that is based on how well you can measure that contaminant or treat the environment to clean up to that contaminant level. So there's some reality pieces that come in when you, and I know I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but it's a general kind of back and forth review of the information you have, and what the toxicity is, at what levels, and can you measure it, and can you clean up to that level?
Great. Thank you so much for that excellent, excellent explanation. Are you okay with another one or
Sure.
two questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. One person has posed a question that is specific to mercury. And they're asking if you can comment on the issue of mercury contamination in homes, including the use of mercury in religious ceremonies. Is that something that you have looked at within your work, or have any comments on that?
Yeah, I personally do not have any experience in that. There have been health assessments done on mercury. There are documents out there that are still publicly available that I think would be worth exploring. And um, if there really is a following or pursuing question on this, I'm happy to put you in contact with some experts who are retired now, but who might be able to answer the questions more directly.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Um, Another question is this person asks, do you see any possibility that the Chapel Hill Human Research Facility could be stood back up under a different administration?
Well, it could, but it's going to take a lot of time. So again, this facility is unique in the work that it does and the way it's constructed. So there are, as I mentioned, there are these rooms. They're called exposure chambers, but they're really rooms, and they have air that is piped into them. It could be very clean air, or it could be air that replicates environmental exposures to ozone or environmental exposures to wood fire smoke. Um, Nothing more than what's already out there in the environment. And people could be sitting there reading, or they could be exercising on a treadmill or a bicycle for a period of time. And then there's ways of evaluating lung function to get a better understanding of how those exposures could impact their health. The people who manage that facility, the engineers that oversee the all of the controls and operations of that facility, they're all gone. And so a new contract would have to be established. People would have to come back in. You'd have to make sure that they really had all of the expertise needed. There would have to be a huge recalibration of for quality assurance. All of that will take time. Oh, and by the way, you'll need your researchers to come back too, or people who can do research in that environment. So the answer is yes, but it's not going to be flipping a switch. A lot of damage has already been done. I haven't given up hope on that particular facility, and I'm glad to see that there are those in Congress on appropriations committees who are looking into this further. But I would say that it's certainly out of commission for the next probably couple years. And so an incoming administration could stand it up. Whether they get it functioning in the time that they're there for that first term or only term remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you so much. There are quite a lot of additional questions that are really important, but I think maybe we can follow up on some of those over email. So we'll just go to our wrap up now. So I will just wrap up with a few quick items. And yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to you, Dr. Orme-Zavaleta. This was a very, very informative presentation. And thanks to everyone who has participated in this webinar, and thanks for all of your really excellent questions. A video recording of this conversation will be available on Che's website soon, and you will all receive an email with a link to that recording. Some of you may also be interested in our next webinar, which is coming up on July 8th. The title of that webinar is Communicating About EDCs and Health, Why Words Matter. And we'll share that link in the chat now. Also, at the end of this webinar, you'll be directed to a Google form where you can provide feedback to us if you like. And you can also reach out to us anytime at info@healthandenvironment.org. So again, thanks to all of you for joining us, and many thanks to Alyssa Tay and Kristen Schaefer for all of their help behind the scenes.